What is going on, Headliner Nation? Jake, Fantasy Headliners. Hopefully everyone's doing well out there today. We're talking about the quarterbacks that we're going to start and sit here for Week 5 fantasy football. A lot of guys out there that are viable options once again here this week. That's why we love the quarterback position in the offseason. It's so deep, you can really find yourself some solid starters whenever you may need one, so we're not going to waste a whole lot of time. We're diving right into the content, and we're going to Thursday Night Football, the Indianapolis Colts and Denver Broncos. And we get a couple veteran quarterbacks here in this matchup. We got Matt Ryan on one side, Russell Wilson on the other. First up, Matt Ryan, currently quarterback 22 overall in fantasy football, does now have multiple touchdowns in back-to-back games and has completed 73% of his passes here as of late over those last two same contests. He's looking okay in Indianapolis. He's averaging 38.5 pass attempts per game, which is 10th most in the NFL. But now he gets a matchup going up against the Denver Broncos, who have actually been pretty good against opposing quarterbacks, allowing only 11.6 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks when it comes to injuries. Center, Ryan Kelly, he's questionable. Jonathan Taylor, he was just ruled out today, so at least we have a little bit of clarity now in that backfield. We could see more check down passes this week to Nyheim Hines, so that's something to pay attention to. But when it comes to the X factor, this is already a team that throws the ball a lot, right? We talked about that, 38.5 pass attempts per game. Now that their number one running back will not be available, does that mean we see even more passing in this game? And if that's the case, a higher potential ceiling for Matt Ryan? I believe it does, and that's why he's up into the start column now for me personally. What about Russell Wilson? He's coming off his best game of the year. He's currently up to quarterback 14 overall, and he's really starting to utilize that deep ball a little bit more to Courtland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy. He's averaging only 32.8 pass attempts per game, which is 20th in the NFL. When it comes to a matchup here against the Indianapolis Colts, they allow right around 16.5 fantasy points per game, kind of a middle-of-the-road defense. Injuries, though, we know he just lost Javonte Williams. Offensive lineman Billy Turner, Quinn Meinerz are both questionable. What about Russ himself? Kind of dealing with a little bit of a sore shoulder himself, so that's something we're paying attention to here as the week continues as well. But the X factor has to be the passing game, right? Now that we don't have Javonte Williams and we have a lot of question marks in the backfield, do we see Russ start to push the ball more down the field instead of relying a little bit more on that running game? I have a feeling that's what we see here, at least this week, going up against the Indianapolis Colts, really starting to get on the same page with Sutton and Jeudy, which is definitely what we want to see here. So Russ, going to be a start for me as well. Let's move on to Sunday football now. The New York Giants and Green Bay Packers for Daniel Jones. I'm still not intrigued to start Daniel Jones in fantasy football. Even though he's currently quarterback 13 overall, he only has one passing touchdown over the last 3 games combined, and he was really saved in week 4 by 2 rushing touchdowns, but now is dealing with an injured ankle. So do we see the mobility from Daniel Jones that we really need for him to be a fantasy viable starter? The volume's not overly there in the passing game. They're only averaging 27 pass attempts per game, which was 28th in the league. Now they're going up against Green Bay, who allows the 6th fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks at only 12.8 fantasy points per game. He's dealing with that injury. He's got no Kenny Golladay. He's still waiting on Kadarius Toney and Wan'Dale Robinson to return. He's got no Sterling Shepard. All he's really got is Saquon Barkley at this point, but he needs that rushing upside. And with the injury to the ankle, I'm not banking on it this week. He's going to be a sit. His opponent in that game, Aaron Rodgers, currently up to quarterback 21, which is weird to say up to quarterback 21, but he started off so slow. He now has multiple touchdowns, though, in 3 straight games, but is yet to eclipse that 300-yard mark that we'd really like to see him, kind of where we've seen him in years past. A little bit lower of a ceiling for Aaron Rodgers, but he's still throwing the ball over 33 times a game. Going up against the Giants, they only allow 13.8 fantasy points per game, but there's no major injury concerns right now for Aaron Rodgers. The X factor for me is going to be Romeo Doubs. Yes, I know it's pronounced Dobbs, but Doubs is so much more fun to say. Plus, we're starting to see Christian Watson pick it up here a little bit, plus Allen Lazard as well. He has enough weapons to go out there and throw multiple touchdowns a week, and that's what we're looking for here. So Aaron Rodgers is going to be a start. How about the Pittsburgh Steelers and Buffalo Bills? First, we have Kenny Pickett, and he's just got to protect the ball a little bit more. He had 3 interceptions in his first action just last week, but he kind of saved his performance by taking 2 rushing touchdowns away from Najee Harris owners, which is somewhat interesting. Pittsburgh averaging right around 32.5 pass attempts per game, 22nd in the NFL, but now he gets a matchup going up against the Buffalo Bills, who only allow 10 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks, second fewest in the league. Not ideal for Kenny Pickett here in his first ever NFL start. Injury concerns, not a whole lot right this second that are affecting Kenny Pickett, but the X factor is, can they open the passing game enough and push it down the field consistently to the likes of Chase Claypool and George Pickens? Okay, can Deontay Johnson get a couple targets out there? Please, we need less interceptions, more touchdowns, more vertical offense down the field to all these playmakers if Kenny Pickett's ever really going to become a fantasy viable option. His opponent, a very fantasy viable option, I think we could all agree on, right? And Josh Allen, currently sitting at quarterback 2 overall, on the verge of averaging 30 fantasy points per game, coming off his best rushing performance of the season as well, where he just had 11 carries for 70 yards and a touchdown, which really helped his lower production in the passing game this past week. They're still averaging right around 42.5 pass attempts a game, 4th highest in the league, and almost 7 more times than what they were doing in 2021. Pittsburgh allowing just over 18 fantasy points per game, so not a bad matchup. He has lost Jamison Crowder and Isaiah McKenzie, currently in concussion protocol. Also, offensive tackle Justin Murray, questionable to play in this game, so those are a few injuries to watch. But when it comes to X Factor, the return of the rushing upside is what takes Josh Allen from a top 3, top 5 option to the top option. If that returns, you're going to be happy. Of course, you're starting Josh Allen. How about the Chargers and the Browns now? You got Justin Herbert, because right now, man, I'm feeling pretty damn fancy right this second, if I do say so myself. He's currently quarterback 7 overall, averaging 20.6 fantasy points per game, and coming off his best game of the year, so I guess the ribs are okay. He just threw for 340 yards, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions, and he absolutely crushed Cleveland last time he played him back in 2021. Now, they're averaging just over 41 pass attempts per game, top 5 in the NFL. Cleveland allowing right around 16.5 fantasy points per game. Is Keenan Allen still out? More than likely, probably so, but I'm loving the fact that they're including Austin Eckler in the passing game once again. That's what really helps this floor of Justin Herbert, because Austin Eckler is a playmaker. He can take a screen pass 50 yards to the house, and Justin Herbert's going to get credit for a 50-yard touchdown. So that's definitely something great to see. Get the ball in the hands of your playmakers. They can make good things happen. Love that upside for Herbie. How about his opponent, Jacoby Brissett? Not so much, right? He's currently quarterback 17, only has 1 game on this season with multiple touchdowns, and is yet to throw for over 235 yards in a game. They're only throwing the ball just over 31 times a contest, and heck, a lot of that time they're not even throwing it to Amari Cooper, so that's also puzzling. The Chargers, not a bad matchup. They allow over 18 fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks, 13th most in the league, but this offensive line is still somewhat banged up in Cleveland. Now offensive tackle Joe Haeg, he's been added to the list of people who are banged up on that offensive line as well. The ceiling just isn't there for fantasy football. He's going to give them an opportunity to win each and every week, but this offense is Nick Chubb right now, and Jacoby Brissett just isn't a guy that I can start with any confidence. How about the Houston Texans and Jacksonville Jaguars? Davis Mills. Now, he's currently quarterback 24 overall, but it's honestly kind of puzzling to me here. If you watch any of the Houston Texans games, you would expect the numbers to be slightly higher than what they really are for Davis Mills. He's yet to throw for over 250 yards in a game, which is weird because it seems like he's always throwing because they're always trailing, and he has 4 interceptions over the last 2 weeks. He's throwing the ball over 35 times a game, which is top half of the league, 15th most, but now he has a matchup going up against Jacksonville, who allows 16.3 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks, which is 19th in the league. The offensive line still nursing some injuries. Wasn't ever that great to begin with, though, so it's not we have massive losses. The X factor is just that they're running the ball too damn much in games that they're losing, and it's really taking away the ceiling from Davis Mills. He's not a fantasy viable starter just yet. His opponent, though, Trevor Lawrence. He has built a foundation that has made him a fantasy viable option here in 2022. He's quarterback 15 on the season, has 3 straight games with multiple touchdowns, and I don't think anyone was anticipating 5 turnovers just last week with an interception and 4 fumbles in week 4. I'm going to blame that on the weather. Trevor going to get a pass on the weather, right? I'm going to let you have that one, Trevor, but don't you ever let that happen again. They're still throwing the ball over 33 times a game, 17th most in the league. This matchup going up against Houston, they're an above average defense. They're only allowing 14.1 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. Not that bad. A lot easier to run on Houston than it is to throw on them when it comes to injuries. Zay Jones is questionable, and so is offensive tackle Cole Van Lanen, which is a fun name. Cole Van Lanen. Why don't I have a cool name like that? But they're banged up there on that offensive line as well. Not an overall loss to this team, though. They're actually one of the more healthier teams in the NFL right this second. But when it comes to the X factor, it's the overall offense in Jacksonville. It has improved so much from 2021 to 2022. We're starting to see that progression in the career of Trevor Lawrence. And if we have a quarterback that's scoring multiple touchdowns a week, that's what we're looking for in fantasy football. It's those multiple touchdown games that give us that ceiling each and every week. Right now, Trevor Lawrence has that. He's going to be a start. How about Chicago and Minnesota and a quarterback? I would like to say with no ceiling, but then somebody on the comment section is going to be, Jake, if he has no ceiling, that means his potential is unlimited. But you know what I mean. It's disgusting when you look at Justin Fields, and I feel bad for this kid. He's quarterback 31 on the year, hasn't thrown for a touchdown since week 1, has had turnovers in every game this season, only throwing the ball 17 times a game. That's dead last in the NFL. Now a matchup going up against Minnesota, a middle-of-the-pack defense, allowing 17.5 fantasy points per game. I wish Justin Fields could get to 17.5 fantasy points per game. No other major injury concerns here, waiting to hear about David Montgomery. But when it comes to X factor right now in this offense, there is none. They can't do anything in the passing game consistently, and until they somewhat figure it out, I'm not starting Justin Fields in fantasy football. Kirk Cousins, on the other hand, all right, he's up to quarterback 16 now. Historically plays well against Chicago, though, there in Minnesota. He averages just around 19 fantasy points per game in games that he's played against Chicago in the past, and it was great to see him get Justin Jefferson going last week. They're throwing the ball quite a bit in Minnesota. 39.5 times per game, which is 6th most in the NFL. Now going up against Chicago, they allow 15.8 fantasy points per game. Not a bad defense there in Chicago. No major injury concerns for Kirk Cousins, but the X factor is a home game with that type of volume, with those type of weapons, gives us that multi-touchdown possibility, and the reason why we continue to start Kirk Cousins. How about Detroit and New England? Let's start it off with Jared Goff of the Detroit Lions. He is quarterback 5. Single digit, 5th overall in fantasy football, and averaging almost 23 fantasy points per game. Has 3 games with multiple touchdowns, has 2 games with 4 touchdowns, and he did it without his top wide receivers in week 4. And what's even more impressive than that is he's doing it without having to throw so much that his arm falls off. He's only averaging 38 pass attempts per game, 11th most in the league. He's being super efficient. Now a matchup going up against New England. They're a lot easier to throw on than they are to run on. They're allowing over 21 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks, 9th most in the NFL. I'm actually going to go over to Prize Picks right now and smash the over on Jared Goff, which is currently set at 250.5 passing yards. That's a number he's beat now in 3 straight ball games. Smashing the over right there on Jared Goff. If you haven't joined us yet on Prize Picks, you need to. Make sure you head over there, set up a new account, use referral code Headliners when you do so. If you make that initial deposit of at least $10, we'll match your deposit all the way up to $100. So make sure you come and have some fun there with us as well. Injury concerns, obviously, you know we have quite a bit here. Does he get Amon-Ra back? Does he get DJ Chark back? Does he get Quintez Cephus back? What about DeAndre Swift? When does he return? A lot of things going on in this offense, but Jared Goff is the one constant right now. And really, the only reason that this isn't a higher ceiling game for me is it would not surprise me if they get a lead against New England and rely a little bit more on the running game. They're not having to play from behind in this game, at least not, double score deficits to where they're constantly having to go deep down the field. Maybe that lowers the ceiling a little bit for Jared Goff, but he's still going to be a start. For Bailey Zappi in New England, who I kind of anticipate to be the starter here this week, but it doesn't matter if it's Mac Jones or Bailey Zappi. They're both going to be a sit here this week. New England, not some high-profile, prolific passing attack that we want to look forward to watching each and every week. They're only throwing the ball just over 29 times a game, 25th in the NFL. I wish they did throw it more, though, because if they did, this would be a great matchup for them going up against Detroit. They allow over 25 fantasy points per game, the most in the NFL, to opposing quarterbacks. But you got Mac Jones banged up, Brian Hoyer banged up, Jacoby Myers banged up, Jonnu Smith banged up. Poor Bailey Zappi out there just trying to figure out the offense on the fly. Didn't look half bad last week, but just doesn't have that high ceiling that we're looking for. And I expect a lot of Damian Harris and Ramondre Stevenson here this week in a matchup in which they can exploit on the ground against the Lions. How about Seattle and New Orleans? Geno Smith is just out there. He is surprising me. On the record right now on camera, Geno Smith, I had no idea. I did not expect this from Geno Smith, full disclosure. He's currently quarterback 10 overall on the season. He's had at least 2 touchdowns in 3 of the 4 games he started this year. He's completing over 77% of his passes, only having to throw the ball 33 times a contest, which is 19th in the NFL, so you know he's super efficient. But now he's got a tough matchup going up against New Orleans. They allow only 13.5 fantasy points per game. 8th fewest in the NFL. No major injury concerns though for Geno Smith, and the X factor for me is really just trying to temper expectations a little bit. This is going to be a difficult game on the road in New Orleans, but this guy continues to surprise people, and he's played some difficult matchups already. Don't forget, he's already gone up against San Francisco and Denver. He's performed well against difficult defenses before. Everybody keeps writing off Geno Smith, and he continues to not write back, which I think is the line that he said in week 1. He's surprising a lot of people. He's a fringe start for me here this week. His opponent, probably Andy Dalton. We don't know for sure if it's going to be Jameis or Dalton for sure, but honestly, I don't know if this would turn out any differently if we were to swap the name at the top here. Andy Dalton didn't do bad for Jameis Winston last week. He had 236 yards passing and a touchdown, completed 71% of his passes, which isn't bad for having limited weapons. Remember, he had no Michael Thomas. He had no Alvin Kamara. They're out there throwing the ball right around 35 times a contest, 14th most in the NFL. Seattle allows the 6th most points to opposing quarterbacks at 21.9 per game. So a decent matchup here, but do we have Alvin Kamara? Do we have Michael Thomas? Do we have Jameis Winston? Andrews Pete, one of their best offensive linemen, questionable to play. Do any of them play? Plus, we know that Jarvis Landry not 100%, Taysom Hill not 100%. And really, when it comes to X Factor, I'm only giving them 2 points because they're playing at home, and that crowd in New Orleans really gives this team an overall boost, especially on the defensive side of the football. When the defense is playing well, the offense tends to play a little bit better as well. For now, though, can't sit either one of these guys until we get more clarity in this overall offense. How about the Miami Dolphins and New York Jets? Teddy Bridgewater now under center with Tua Tagovailoa being ruled out. Teddy didn't do half bad after Tua went out last week, right? I mean, he pushed the ball down the field deep to Tyreek Hill. That was great to see. Had 193 yards passing, 1 touchdown, and 1 interception, 12 overall fantasy points, and just a little over a half of football. Miami's throwing the ball on average 35 times a game, 16th most in the NFL, so right there, right in the middle. The Jets allow over 19 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks, 10th most in the league. You got Tua ruled out. You got Cedric Wilson, questionable. Jalen Waddle, is he getting closer to 100% from a groin injury he had a few weeks ago? But with the weapons that Teddy B has, in the offense that he's in, he really doesn't have to do too much other than not turn the ball over consistently, and he's going to rack up a decent day. When you have guys that are capable of yards after the catch, like Jalen Waddle, like Tyreek Hill, they can make the most simplest of passes the most productive ones in the NFL. And that's what we're really loving here with Teddy Bridgewater here this week. He's going to be a start. He's a low-end start, but in a good matchup, a start nonetheless. His opponent, Zach Wilson, looked pretty decent in his first game of 2022 and finishing quarterback 10 overall. Had 252 yards passing, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions, caught a touchdown there as well though, and beat the Pittsburgh Steelers. That's a sign of good things to come. We know the Jets like to air it out. They're averaging 48 pass attempts per game. A lot of that had to do with Flacco to begin the season because we only saw Zach Wilson throw the ball 36 times last week, but now they're going up against Miami. And Miami allows the 3rd most points in the NFL to opposing quarterbacks at 24.7 fantasy points per game. And now, both Byron Jones and Xavier Howard in the secondary of the Miami Dolphins are banged up and questionable to play. I'm actually going to head over to Prize Picks as well on Zach Wilson and smash the over because right now, his passing prop is set at only 205.5 passing yards. I think he can eclipse that here this week. We're going to smash the over. When it comes to injuries, we know the offensive line is still hurting. Now offensive tackle Max Mitchell has been added to the list of injuries. He's doubtful to play. Now, there's reports coming out that even Zach Wilson himself was limited in practice, wasn't out there to start the week, and what kind of injury is he dealing with? Doesn't sound like anything major. He was warming up indoors, expects to practice, doesn't expect to miss this game by any means. And then the X factor is the Jets get very little credit for what improvements they're making in this offense. This game could be fun to watch. Corey Davis, Elijah Moore, Garrett Wilson, Tyler Conklin, Breece Hall, Michael Carter are plenty of weapons at the disposal of Zach Wilson to go out there and have a solid game. It may only be his second start of the season, but I like Zach Wilson, and I'll start him here this week if need be. Now we'll go on to Atlanta and Tampa Bay. Marcus Mariota first, down to quarterback 19 overall, and has been free-falling here for the last couple weeks. Only had 7 completed passes in week 4. 4 straight weeks now with a rushing decline, and has had 0 touchdowns in 2 of the 4 games he's played. A lot of people love Marcus Mariota, and a lot of people think I didn't really care for him, and it's not the case. It's just we're not seeing any consistency from him to start this season. They're only throwing the ball 24.5 times a game. That's 31st in the league, second to only the Bears, who are horrendous in the passing game. Now a matchup going up against Tampa Bay, whose secondary has looked average here, I would say, over the last few weeks. They're only allowing 15 fantasy points per game, though, 22nd in the league. Cordero Patterson, arguably their best weapon. He's hurt. He won't be out there. He was a huge part of this offense. They have no idea how to utilize Kyle Pitts, it looks like. I mean, could they turn it around? Sure, they absolutely could. But I got to see those changes before we trust those changes and put them into our lineup. With a difficult matchup like this, I'm not starting Marcus Mariota again. His opponent, Tom Brady, yes, I will start Tom Brady once again. He's actually on his way up the point standings here now, up to quarterback 19, and it's amazing how much better this guy plays when he has healthy weapons around him. 385 yards, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions in week 4, and it was great for him to have Mike Evans and Chris Godwin on the football field. They're averaging 38 pass attempts per game, 9th most in the NFL. Atlanta allows the 11th most points to opposing quarterbacks at 19.6. The offensive line, still not 100% healthy. Julio, also questionable. What else is new? Cameron Brate, questionable, but really all he needs is Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, and a healthy Lenny Fournette there in the backfield, and he has all he needs to put up a solid day at home in a decent matchup. I'll start Tom Brady. How about the Tennessee Titans and Washington Commandos? Ryan Tannehill continues just to be a solid quarterback. He's currently quarterback 20 overall, but has multiple touchdowns in 3 of the 4 games he's played so far this season. He provides a safe weekly floor. He's not throwing a ton, which is no surprise in Tennessee, averaging only 26.5 pass attempts per game. Washington, though, struggles against opposing quarterbacks. They allow over 21 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. Now, he will be without one of his top wide receivers. Treylon Burks could miss a couple of weeks here. That is not ideal. Maybe we see more Bobby Trees in this offense. Maybe we continue to see more pass catching work go the way of Derrick Henry. That's what I'm talking about right there. The ceiling may be lower, but the floor is fairly safe. He's a verge start for me once again this week. For Carson Wentz, he's currently down to quarterback 9 and was really affected the last 2 weeks by the defensive pass rush. Only 1 touchdown over his last 2 weeks combined is not ideal for Carson Wentz. They're still throwing the ball a lot, 43 times a game. 3rd most in the NFL. And now a matchup against Tennessee, which allows the 7th most points to opposing quarterbacks at 21.6, but there are a ton of injuries of concern in Washington, especially on the offensive line. Sam Cosmi, Chase Roulier, Trey Turner, Tyler Lawson, they're all hurt right now. And now he's also going to be missing one of his top receiving weapons in Jahan Dotson with a hamstring injury. This is a low-end, risky start. The only reason that Carson Wentz is a start right now is because the matchup is so good. This could turn into a fairly big Curtis Samuel day. Maybe we see a big play from either Terry McLaurin or Logan Thomas in this ball game, but it's a risky one. It's just too hard to sit in an offense that's going to throw the ball so much against a team that gives up quite a few points. But that'll take us down to San Francisco and Carolina for Jimmy G. He just continues to do Jimmy G types of things. 3 straight games with 1 passing touchdown, taking care of the football, winning games, but not filling the stat sheet. San Francisco only throws the ball on average 27 times a game, which is 28th in the NFL. he'll benefit from those big plays like we saw last week from Deebo Samuel. But now going up against Carolina, they're pretty solid against opposing quarterbacks, allowing only 16.1 fantasy points per game. I wouldn't mind Jimmy G with 16 points if I'm being completely honest. Obviously, the offensive line, a few injuries there, and they just lost offensive tackle Colton McKivitz for a couple weeks, which is something that is not ideal for the San Francisco 49ers. But Jimmy G continues to just be a safe floor play. We've seen in 2022 the same thing we've seen forever in San Francisco with Jimmy G. He's going to lead them to wins. He's going to be a solid NFL quarterback. He's going to protect the football. But in fantasy football, just doesn't really have that high ceiling we're looking for. Neither does his opponent, Baker Mayfield, currently quarterback 23 overall, and kind of following in the ways of one Jimmy G. Baker, only one touchdown in each game this ceiling. There's just no ceiling here. This offense is overall boring in Carolina. It looks lost at times. They don't know if they want McCaffrey to run the ball or catch the ball. They can't determine if DJ Moore is open or he's not. It's not ideal in Carolina right now, and especially not in this matchup. Going up against the San Francisco 49ers, they allow the fewest points of any team in the NFL to opposing quarterbacks at only 9.6. Baker's not going to have a good week, and I don't expect that there's too many people out there that want to start him in fantasy football. He's obviously a sit. How about Philadelphia? Jalen Hurts, Kyler Murray. Two quarterbacks I can get behind here this week. Jalen Hurts currently quarterback 3 overall in fantasy football, but I'm going to blame the down week in week 4 on the weather that he had to play through. Kind of similar to Trevor Lawrence, right? Still finishes a top 15 quarterback last week, though, throwing the ball on average 31 times a game, which is not ideal, but he also had 16 rush attempts last week, so that's going to add to the volume that he has each and every week. Arizona allows just about 18 fantasy points per game, 15th most in the NFL. They could be getting back offensive tackle Andre Dillard pretty soon, but they also just basically lost Jordan Mailata and Isaac Seumalo, I think is how you say his last name, who are both questionable to play this week. Those are two pieces on the offensive line that they really need. This is a perfect opportunity for the Philadelphia Eagles to get back on track, though, against the Arizona Cardinals. It just seems like everyone else does. Right? I mean, sorry. That was me being a frustrated Cardinals fan right here, but I'm still starting Jalen Hurts, obviously. Kyler Murray, quarterback 6 overall on the season, and he's doing it without being very reliant on his feet. The rushing upside really hasn't been there consistently in 2022, but him and Hollywood Brown starting to look like a pretty dangerous duo out there. They're throwing the ball a lot in Arizona, over 40 times a game, but Philadelphia is 3rd best in the NFL against opposing quarterbacks, allowing only 10.9 fantasy points per game. A little bit of a silver lining here, though. The Philadelphia secondary a little bit banged up, Darius Slay among those, so if Darius Slay is questionable and does not play in this game, that could help Kyler Murray. AJ Green, also questionable in this contest. Does it really matter? AJ Green has basically been retired for like 3 years, I believe, at this point. Dude out there just drawing a paycheck. X Factor, it's a home game. They're more than likely going to be playing from behind. If I had to guess, the Philadelphia Eagles should be able to put up some points on the Arizona Cardinals, which means Kyler Murray going to be playing catch up the entire second half of the ball game, which also means you may be getting some gray hair in the first half if he's not doing a whole lot, and then he'll start to come around the second half. Obviously, we're starting Kyler Murray for the Dallas Cowboys, Los Angeles Rams. Cooper Rush, he's come in and played well and been a big surprise for a lot of people. He's been playing turnover-free football, averaging right around 225 yards a game and a touchdown. Just a solid overall quarterback. But they're only throwing the ball right around 32.5 times a game, 20th most in the NFL. Now they're going up against the Rams, who allow the 12th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks, which is crazy to even think about with the amount of playmakers they have on that defense, allowing over 19 fantasy points per game to quarterbacks. But the offensive line still slightly banged up, and so is wide receiver Noah Brown, another guy that we're paying attention to. Shouldn't hurt as much, being that they got Michael Gallup back. So that's a good thing. I love what I'm really seeing from Cooper Rush in real life football. When you watch the Dallas Cowboys play, I don't feel like I'm watching some backup quarterback play. He's overall solid. For fantasy football, though, just not that ceiling we're looking for. His opponent, Matthew Stafford, woof, right? I mean, he's currently quarterback 25 overall. The entire offense as a whole looks horrible. It's nothing but force the ball to Cooper Kupp or nothing else. He's had back-to-back weeks now with no passing touchdowns. And that is nuts for this offense that he has here in LA. They're still throwing the ball over 37 times a game. Dallas is one of the best in the league against opposing quarterbacks, allowing only 13 fantasy points per game. The offensive line in LA is hurting. Brian Allen, Coleman Shelton, David Edwards, all hurt on the offensive line, and that is not helping Matthew Stafford. He has no time in the pocket for plays to develop down the field. The talent is there. The scheme makes no sense. Why did they become so one-dimensional? At what point did Sean McVay just say, hey, listen, our entire offensive game plan is just force-feeding the hell out of the ball to Cooper Kupp? Now, don't get me wrong. I love Cooper Kupp. Dude is an amazing wide receiver, and he's open all the time. But opposing defenses know that that's where the ball is going, and eventually they're going to start to focus in on Cooper Kupp and see if they can beat him somewhere else, because as of right now, they're not getting anything any other part of this offense, maybe outside of Tyler Higbee. And he's just dinking and dunking down the field. Everything else going the way of Cooper Kupp. They're going to have to figure that out in LA. How about Sunday Night Football? We have the Cincinnati Bengals and Baltimore Ravens, my Manscaped matchup of the week. That's right, head over to manscaped.com as soon as this video is over. Get yourself something nice for the travel bag, some deodorant, some body wash, some shampoo, whatever it is you're looking for. It's not just ball trimmers, guys. A lot of people just see the funny commercials, the funny ads, and think that that's all that they have. No, there is so much more there. You got to go check it out. Just make sure you use promo code Headliners at checkout for 20% off and free shipping. But a matchup between Joe Burrow and Lamar Jackson in primetime football is exactly what we're looking for right now. Joe Burrow currently quarterback 8 overall, and the passing offense really starting to look a lot better here over the last 2 weeks. Now has back-to-back games with at least 275 yards passing and 2+ touchdowns. They're throwing the ball over 39 times a game. Now they're going up against Baltimore, who allows the second most points in the league to opposing quarterbacks at 24.9. T. Higgins is questionable, hoping he plays this weekend though, but we'll still have Jamar Chase, Tyler Boyd, Hayden Hurst, Joe Mixon, and a good matchup on primetime. I'm definitely starting Joe Burrow for Lamar Jackson. He's still the current quarterback 1 overall in fantasy football, and he's coming off a quote-unquote down week. Still has 13 total touchdowns on the season, 70+ rushing yards now in 3 straight ball games. Is pretty dang consistent when it comes to passing volume. He's had exactly 29 pass attempts now in 3 straight ball games. The Bengals have done pretty good so far in this young year, though, against opposing quarterbacks, allowing only 11.7 fantasy points per game, 5th fewest in the NFL. Does Ronnie Stanley come back? Patrick McCarry, another offensive lineman who's currently hurting. Rashad Bateman, questionable to play. Justice Hill, questionable to play. But Lamar Jackson can take over a ball game. And with his ability to really rack up points with his feet like we've seen as of late, remember 3 straight games with 70 or more rushing yards, that's really going to take your safe floor to a high ceiling. Obviously, I shouldn't have to talk you. I'm not talking you into starting Lamar Jackson. I know you're smart enough to start Lamar Jackson. And then Monday Night Football, the Las Vegas Raiders and Kansas City Chiefs, another game that was in the running for my Manscaped must-watch matchup. We'll start off with Derek Carr here. He's currently quarterback 12 overall on the year, coming off his worst game of the season, in which he didn't have a touchdown, but did chip in 40 rushing yards, which is something that kind of helped a lot of people who had Derek Carr in their lineup. He's throwing the ball on average 39 times a ball game, 8th most in the NFL. The Chiefs allow the 5th most fantasy points to quarterbacks at 22.1 per game. Hunter Renfrow still questionable, but the X factor is dropping rapidly. And it's because, similar to the Rams, the offense in Las Vegas is just locked on Davante Adams, and it's really Davante Adams or bust. Now, obviously, we saw a huge game last week from Josh Jacobs, which we love to see. If we can get multiple options in the passing game to really be productive, though, that's something we could see a lot more often from Josh Jacobs, and not just once every month, maybe. I like Derek Carr this week in a game in which they're probably going to have to be playing catch-up a little bit, because nobody can really stop the Kansas City Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes right this second. He's going to be a start. And then for Patrick Mahomes, obviously, we're starting this dude. He's currently quarterback 4 overall. He's looking like a magician on the field. His arm angles are all over the place. He's doing turnaround fadeaways into the end. Whatever it may be, Patrick Mahomes is doing it right. He's even racking up some rushing upside here over the last 2 weeks, where he has 60 yards combined over the last 2 ball games, throwing the ball 37 times a game. The Raiders allowing over 24 fantasy football points per game to opposing quarterbacks. No major injuries. It's a home game on Monday Night Football against a division opponent, and this guy is in full Showtime mode. Yeah, I'm going to start Patrick Mahomes. But there you have it, my starts and sits for the quarterback position here, week 5 fantasy football. Hopefully I was able to give you some information to help make your decisions a little bit easier, but don't worry if you have multiple guys listed as starts. Our rankings will come out here on Thursday before kickoff of the Thursday night game to make sure you have enough time to set your lineups and get those best players in there for maybe some absolute dominance here in week 5. If you enjoyed the content, do me a favor, hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already. I'm going to get out of here for the day. Hopefully you have a great rest of your day, a great week, and we'll talk to you later.